G'day, welcome to another one of my little videos. Last time we talked about the thrust and some of the things that could be impacting your capacity to thrust. I talked about the importance of the hip muscles for stability and for creating a nice clean line. Today I want to talk about another important muscle. It's not the only one that affects you at the shoulder joint, but this is one of the most important muscles I've found in a lot of people, especially if they're physically active in other areas. Or if they have postural concerns, such as a typically rounded and forward posture, or if they're heavy swimmers, if they do lots of weights training without getting mobility through their shoulder joint. That muscle is Latissimus Dorsi. It's one of the most important muscles. It's a superficial most muscle that sits on the back. It creates that significant kind of V shape. You think of Sylvester Stallone in his heyday back in the 80s, or you look at a swimmer's back. Particularly people who do butterfly, for example, you'll see a nice V shape to the back there. So that's the Latissimus Dorsi that forms that. There's one on the left and there's one on the right. You can see here how vast this muscle is. It's a very important muscle. It runs all the way down here to the top of your pelvis, and it attaches across the back of your pelvis there, and it also attaches all the way up these vertebrae, all the way up your lumbar spine, all the way to your 7th thoracic vertebra, and from those places it runs in this wrapping fashion around the body. So it wraps around your body, and it then wraps around your humerus to attach into this little groove between two little bony ridges on the front, called the intertubercular groove or sulcus, or the bicipital groove is another name for that. It doesn't matter what it's called. What matters is where it attaches to and what it does. So it runs from here and it attaches all the way up to the top. So it has some primary actions around the shoulder joint. Firstly, if I come from this position and pull my arm down, it's involved in that action which is called extension. If I take my arm away from my body and then I bring it back toward the midline, it's involved in that action. It's the prime mover for that action, and that's called adduction, because you're adding the arm back to the midline of the body. And lastly, well, no, not lastly, but across the shoulder joint, the actions it performs, it is also involved in, we've talked about adduction and we've talked about extension, okay? Last one it's involved in is this internal rotation, drawing the shoulders in. If you've ever seen someone who only does their forward strokes in the pool, they typically have quite rounded posture. And that's because of the Latissimus Dorsi and some other friends pulling these muscles in. Okay, I'm not talking about all of those ones today, the pecs, pec major, pec minor, teres muscles, infraspinalis. We're not talking about all of those, just about this superficial most, by superficial I mean closest to the skin, superficial most muscle, which is called Latissimus Dorsi. Now there's another action that Latissimus Dorsi does, which is really important for us to consider. Let's bring my little friend along here. Little friend. He's been around, he's seen a lot of action. This friend, my little skeletal buddy. I'll jump over here. You have a look at this skeleton as it represents a real person. We can see that across here, through here and up here is where the Latissimus Dorsi muscle attaches. It then wraps its way around. See, it wraps around the body, then it deviates from the body to wrap further around the humerus. So it goes around here, wraps around the humerus, and it attaches into this little groove here that I was talking about before, into the floor of that place there. It attaches like this. And it's involved in, you can see now, if this represents the muscle, if I pull away from the midline, like so, and the muscle contracts, it will pull that down. If I pull away from the midline like this, it will pull that back down. And from here, if it pulls in without any other movement, it will rotate this, it's a bit hard to do, it will rotate that in like so. Rotate in. So these are the primary actions around the shoulder joint, what we call the glenohumeral joint. Then we have the shoulder joint attached to the pectoral girdle, which is simply where the scapula attaches to the clavicle, and collarbone attaches to the shoulder blade. This The purpose of this, anatomically and by its design, the physics of it, is to transfer forces from the axial skeleton here to the peripheral skeleton, all the way out to the fingers, and to transfer force from the peripheral skeleton down the arm and to the axial skeleton. It distributes that force. The other thing it does is it allows greater movement. The shoulder blade moves forward and backward on the body. Now, the latissimus dorsi muscle does not attach directly to the shoulder blade. It does, however, attach to the humerus, which in turn is attached to the shoulder blade. So, latissimus dorsi can be involved in, and is involved in, depressing the shoulders down. So when we do this action, latissimus dorsi can be involved and is involved. It's also involved in causing this rounded posture as well and holding us down in this kind of position here. Latissimus dorsi is really important. The way a muscle restricts movement is that the brain says, the central nervous system in the brain thinks that its average range is the normal range of motion. And so when we go outside of that average range of motion, the central nervous system makes the muscle contract and pull back so that we can't stretch it, because it thinks it might be unsafe. So if this is our average range of motion here, and we're always pulling down, yes, I love you too, and all of that stuff is happening, then what we discover is that when we go outside of that range of motion, all of a sudden, the tight muscle stops the movement of the shoulder joint and we compensate in other areas. So for example, if you need to extend through the thrust into this position here, extend through the thrust like that, the shoulder blade should be able to move forward. But if latissimus dorsi hanging on here is too tight, and there's several reasons why it may be, for a start, are you internally rotated or externally rotated through your shoulder joint when you thrust? That position alone will create tension on latissimus dorsi, which means that as this shoulder blade moves forward, it will be restricted in the protraction action. You can see that the lats here is actually working in this action. That's where they are, and they switch on when we pull back and pull down. So if I'm extending out like this and that's tight, it won't allow the full thrust, the full carriage of the shoulder blade that we need around the rib cage. Latissimus dorsi restricts that. Another thing latissimus dorsi does is, if we go up like that, just simply coming up into this extended position, latissimus dorsi, if it's tight, will restrict that movement. Another thing it does is, if we have to cut across our body, we'll get rid of my little very affectionate friend. If we need to cut across the body, so we need to come over with a crooked cut over the side like so, then we find that we are drawing out some kind of movement through the lats here. If it's tight, it will stop this action of the arm across the body as well. So these are some of the ways in which latissimus dorsi can restrict what we do. And there's another thing that it restricts, lastly, and this is one that's often forgotten about latissimus dorsi. I invite you to have a look at my picture here. Each muscle on the left and the right has separate nerve supply, and each muscle on the left and the right can act together. If it acts together, it can pull the shoulder blades back, it can do that. It can pull both arms down. Acting together, if I grab onto a bar, latissimus dorsi will pull me up. But acting by itself, it does other things. Well, it can do each of those actions with just the arm, but there's one more action we've forgotten. Have a look at the angle of this muscle. It's an oblique muscle. It's not just moving diagonally up, it's moving diagonally up and around the side and slightly front of the body, or at least of this plane here where the shoulder is. In other words, latissimus dorsi is one of the primary rotators, one of the prime movers of rotation of the torso. When you extend into a thrusting position with 1 foot forward, you probably are not going to be thrusting with your shoulders and hips square. There will be an element of rotation. Square, rotated. I'll show you from the side. Square, rotated, just slightly. This is an anatomically efficient and biomechanically advantageous position with that slight rotation when you thrust. If Latissimus dorsi is tight, it will prevent you from producing the rotation that you need. This means that you will compensate in other areas. You'll start rotating through the hips, or you'll start turning your shoulders and elbows into weird positions. Or one of the most common indicators of a tight latissimus dorsi is that a person has trouble extending beyond a bent elbow position. They just can't do it. It's too tight, because that involves too much stretch on latissimus dorsi and its friends. There's other friends involved in that too. So these are important factors. Finally, latissimus dorsi is vital for shoulder health because it affects so many movements across the shoulder joint. Oh gee, there's so many ways that latissimus dorsi tension and tightness or suboptimal movement patterns will create dysfunction around the shoulder, pain and inability to use it and weakness, a whole bunch of things. So we need to make sure that this muscle is healthy. Two parts of health, well, multiple parts of health, but fundamentally we want to look at the ability of the muscle to activate when it needs to and to switch off when it needs to. They're the two primary elements of health for a muscle. All of the other things, strength, power, speed, agility, they all rely on your ability to switch the muscle on when you want to and switch it off when you want to, and only when you need to. So we need to look at how this muscle on the back affects our stretch when we're in that full thrust, or when we're coming up for a cut, when we're coming over for a cut, when we're lifting up for a cut. All these ways, if it's tight, we'll start compensating. If it's tight this way, we'll arch through the back, like so. We'll arch through the back, and we cease to move through the shoulders if it's too tight. As you can imagine, constant arching through the back, very bad news for the back and for other parts of the body as well, such as the legs. So, I invite you to sit around and I'll show you a really super stretch, two of them, that you can do to help with this muscle and getting it mobile again. Okay, the first stretch I want to take you through is a really simple one, and it won't just work your lats. It will certainly work some of your lats depending on how tight you are. It will work some of the other muscles around that joint too, and it's really important because the way the body tends to work with its mobility is it's like wearing a pair of tight jeans. If your outside layer is made of denim that doesn't stretch, it doesn't matter how much you try to stretch, you will not be able to get into a split position. Your legs just won't do it. The same idea applies to our muscles. If the superficial most muscles are tightest, then you won't be able to get the smaller muscles into an effective stretch. Why? Well, because the body wants to protect them, and it uses the big strong muscles to protect the smaller muscles, and all of the muscles are really just protecting the nervous system because it feels a bit threatened. So what we do is we teach it that it's okay to move into this position and to just relax the more superficial muscles that may be tighter or that may be protecting, so that we don't overdo movement elsewhere. So the first one I want to show you is really simple. We've all done versions of this before, but there are some key points that are really vital to make this one work, and those two key points are this. In this stretch, the arm that you're stretching, I'll be doing my right arm today, the arm that you stretch needs to be horizontal. That is to say, parallel with the ground. In other words, in your end position, your wrist should be at roughly the same height as your shoulder. That's the first point. The second point is that your elbow must be straight. If your elbow is not straight, you're cheating a little bit and you won't get the full effect of the stretch. Okay? That has to do with how the triceps muscle attaches across here and where it pulls all the fibers and the connective tissues around there. So it's a simple one. Many of us have done it before, and I teach it like this. Take your arm and just swing it up to horizontal and lock. Lock your arm just above the elbow. You can see that my forearm is locking just above the elbow, like this. When you're in this position, straighten the elbow of the stretching arm like so. You can see it straightening there. Now the secret to this stretch is, when you turn on the side, See how my shoulder is forward of the midline? My goal is, while keeping the elbow straight, to draw the shoulder back to the midline and stand tall. We're not doing this. We need to stand tall and draw the shoulder back. Once you do that, you'll notice that my arm is straight. Draw the arm back. Hold that for 5 breaths. 2, 3, 4, 5. They're slow breaths, about 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out. Once you've held the 5 breaths, then with this elbow, push forward into your forearm, but don't let it move. It looks like this. I'm now going to push forward for 5 seconds. I'm pushing forward now. Oh, did you see that change? There wasn't much. 3, 2, 1. Elbow straight? Yes. Arm parallel with the ground? Yes. Good. Then I re-stretch. I can either pull this arm toward my throat or, probably both, draw that shoulder back. With this hand, if you're flexible enough, you can grab onto the side or not. It's up to you. And then we hold that for 10 breaths and slowly relax out. At the end of a stretch like that, it's always a great idea to flippy flop the arm. Just let it drop, let it loosen off, shake it out a bit. Once you've done one side, of course, you have to do the other. Elbow straight, shoulder down and back, chest tall. Push the arm forward for 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop. And re-stretch. Just like that. I'm really tight on my left side today. All around my delts here, very, very tight. We would normally hold that for longer, about, as I said, 10 breaths. I think I might have said seconds before, I meant 10 breaths. So you hold the first position for 5 breaths, contract, push out for 5 seconds, re-stretch and hold the final position for 10 breaths. Slow and gentle breaths. You only need to do that once or twice a week with the contraction. There's no need to do it anymore. Please check with your health professional, your allied health professional, your physiotherapist or doctor, sports medicine guy, exercise physiologist, just to see if you have any issues with your shoulders. Just check with them first to make sure it's safe to do. The next exercise I'll show you is the Latissimus Dorsi exercise proper, and I shall need to be in a slightly different position. This one is a very strong stretch, and it can be modified in many different ways. I'll show you one way, and then we might talk about some other ways in which you can modify it. This second stretch, it can be done in many positions. It can be done against a wall, against a bench. You can do it on the ground. If you're doing it on the ground, you need to make sure that your spine is not rounded like this, but that your bottom sits up in the air and your shoulders are down on the ground and your hips are off your heels. I'll just show you this wall version for now, and you can experiment with how to get into this shape and position. Please be very careful, especially if you've had a shoulder reconstruction or a dislocation of your shoulder. And again, as with the other stretch, check with your healthcare professional or medico to make sure it's safe for you to do this if you have shoulder issues. It starts with you placing both palms onto the wall while you face the wall, and gently just softening your knees and your hips so that they're bent a little. And all the way through this particular stretch, try and stick your bottom up in the air, okay? And the idea is to generate as much of a curve like this in your spine, in the upper back as you can. Lower back, you don't want to create too much curve down there. It's a strong stretch. It's common to get strange sensations in your hands. They disappear when you come out of the stretch. As I said, if you have any conditions that might be a concern to you, please check with your allied healthcare professional just to make sure. Another one, if you have POTS or OI, then it's important that you maybe don't do this version of it and work out a floor version. Hands on the wall, move into the stretch. Place 2 hands on the wall like so, step away slightly from the wall. Then as you bend your knees and stick your bottom out, drop your shoulders down toward the ground, like this. And that's it, it's that easy. You can do a contraction in this position by gently pressing the hands forward into the wall with elbows straight. You only do that gently for a count of 5 seconds. Hold the position, and as you exhale, breathe a little, then you stretch a little further. There's one way you can increase the stretch apart from dropping your shoulders down further, and I'll show you that right now. So we get into the stretch position, drop the shoulders closer to the wall. If I want to increase the stretch, keeping the elbows straight, I just roll onto my little fingers like so. To increase the stretch further, you take your hands down the wall a bit more and drop further down like this, or you take them up a bit higher and drop closer to the wall, closer like this. The closer your hands are to each other at the top, the stronger the sensation usually is. There are other ways you can modify this stretch. We won't go into those today. I hope that you enjoy doing the stretch. It's the same as with the shoulder one. You go into the initial position for 5 seconds. You then push against the wall. My apologies. You go into the initial position for 5 breaths. You then push against the wall gently for 5 seconds. You then move further gently into a stretch, keeping on breathing, and hold that for 10 breaths. Slow, soft and gentle breaths. Easy as that.